One man's hatred and contempt for the plebs drove him to conspire with the enemies of Rome. He decided to destroy Rome rather than watch plebs have a say in the affairs of the state. I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and ancient texts here mean texts that have been around for thousands of years. At the moment I'm going through From the Founding of the City by Titus Livius or Livy. This is a collection of books actually that were written about 2000 years ago. They cover the history of Rome from the founding of the city, which happened around 730 BCE to around 0 AD when Augustus was the emperor of Rome. If you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. During the consulship of T. Geganius and P. Minucius, Rome was at peace with its neighbors. There was no war going on, at least initially. The civic dissensions that had happened 2 years before were kind of like gone, but turns out they just taken a break because the hatred between the patricians and the plebs had not gone away. It was just there, but Rome was pretending like everything was going on well. There was nothing to worry about. But there was an immediate problem that the city was facing. There was a huge shortage of food in the city, and this had been caused by the secession that had happened 2 years prior. During that secession, the plebs had not grown any food, so at this point there is no food for Rome, and the consuls decide to find a solution to this problem, and they send out people to various parts of the region to collect food, and primarily corn. Seems like corn was the staple food of the ancient Romans, and they sent people to places like Ostia, Asturia, Cumae, and Sicily to get corn from these places. And there's something interesting that happens when these people are out there. If you watch my previous video, I did mention a guy who went by the name Aristodemus, and he was a tyrant of a city called Cuma. Cumia is where Tarquinius went to after the battle at Lake Regulus, and he went into this city and he was welcomed by each tyrant who went by the name Aristodemus. Now, when people are sent from Rome to go and buy corn from this region, the ships were detained by Aristodemus, and Aristodemus claimed that he was the heir of Tarquin, and therefore he wanted Rome to release every property they held of Tarquin and send it to him. Now, Livy doesn't tell us how that small argument ends, but he continues telling us about the problem of the corn and the fallout that happened after between the patricians and the plebeians. Now, a huge amount of corn was brought in, mostly from Sicily. And when the corn is in the city, now something comes up. Some people saw it as an opportunity to take away the rights that had been given to the plebeians through the consultations that happened when the plebeians had left the city. Something I covered in my previous video. Now, some of the patricians wanted the tribunes of the people to be removed from power, and they wanted to use the shortage of corn as the bargaining chip, if you may. The person leading this was one Marcius Coriolanus. Now, Coriolanus is a patrician, and he hates the plebeians so much that he thinks now that the corn has come in from outside, the patricians should use that corn to bargain so that the tribunes of the people are removed from power, so that the patricians now can hold all the power of the city. This is what Coriolanus tells the Senate. If they want their corn at the old price, let them restore to the Senate its old powers. Why then do I, after being sent under the yoke, ransomed as it were from brigands, see plebeians magistrates? Why do I see Sicinius in power? Now, Sicinius is the guy who instigated the secession that happened. Am I to endure these indignities a moment longer than I can help? Am I, who could not put up with Tarquin as king, to put up with Sicinius? Let him secede now. Let him call out his plebeians. The way lies open to the sacred hill and to other hills. Let them carry off the corn from our fields as they did 2 years ago. Let them enjoy the scarcity which in their madness they have produced. I'll venture to say that after they have been tamed by these sufferings, they will rather work as laborers themselves in the fields than prevent their being cultivated by an armed secession. Now, it's basically saying this is the moment to put the plebeians in their place, and it's kind of like taunting them and provoking them and telling them, go ahead and do what you did 2 years ago. In fact, you are the cause of all this. We don't have food now because of what you did 2 years ago. Some of the senators did consider Coriolanus' proposal. They did consider using the demand of removal of the tribunes of the people as a condition for lowering the prices at which the people could buy corn at. They quickly found out that it was not possible because the plebeians started protesting. And the protest became so big, and the plebeians started saying that famine was being used against them as though they were enemies. Livy says that they say that the foreign corn was being snatched from their mouth unless their tribunes were given up in chains to Marcius Coriolanus. They called Marcius Coriolanus a new executioner who had sprung up and was ordering them to either die or live as slaves. The tribunes, going by this, Rome became so unstable and the protests became so big that there were concerns that Coriolanus was going to be murdered. He took the interventions of the tribunes of the people to stop that from happening. That's what Livy tells us. The tribune decided to launch a motion at the Senate to impeach Coriolanus, and that kind of like made people to relax a bit because they saw that something was happening that could remove him from being in the Senate. But Coriolanus treated these as threats, and that didn't mean much. In fact, Livy describes it as him being very contemptuous of the threats of impeachment. And he started going around telling people the tribunes of the people didn't have any right to impeach him. And he said that they only had the right to protect the plebeians, but not to punish the patricians. And he said that they were the tribunes of the plebs, not the tribunes of the patricians. So he had a lot of contempt for these authorities, if you may. The fellow patricians initially decided to protect him, or took steps to protect him from being impeached. They did everything they could, but it soon became clear to them that if they wanted to save themselves, they had to let go. They had to let Coriolanus carry his own cross, because if they continued to protect him, then at some point all of them were going to find themselves in trouble. On the day that he was to be impeached, Marcius Coriolanus did not show up. He did not show up, but he was impeached nevertheless. He was impeached in absentia. Soon it became apparent that he was not in the city. He had gone into exile. And he went to the Volscians. And Volscians were one of the biggest enemies of Rome. He went to the Volscians, and going there, he is welcomed by one Atius Tullius, and Atius Tullius was one of the most powerful people among the Volscians. Atius Tullius welcomes him, and Atius Tullius hated Rome very much. Of course, he was an enemy of Rome, and it was like an enemy of my enemy is my friend, basically. He welcomes him in the land of the Volscians, and they join their plans for Rome, even though the outcome they were looking for were not really the same. While Atius Tullius wanted to destroy Rome, Coriolanus wanted to destroy the plebeians, not the entire of Rome. And that becomes apparent as we move along. But their plans to march on Rome was facing a huge obstacle. And the obstacle was the Volscians, the people, were not interested in war. They had fought so many wars and they were tired. They had been defeated by Rome so many times. They were not in the mood to go to another war with Rome. But Atius Tullius and Coriolanus had plans for that. They knew how to make the Volscians join them in going to war with Rome. And they come up with a plan. The plan worked when an opportunity presented itself. And the opportunity came in the form of the games. Livy describes them as the great games. These were games that were organized for the gods mostly. And people would come to Rome from different nationalities. Even people who were enemies of Rome would come to Rome to celebrate with Romans and other people and to participate in these games. The Volscians are led to Rome by Atius Tullius. Now, Atius Tullius comes to Rome with the Volscians, and when they arrive in Rome and the games are underway, Atius Tullius requests for a meeting with the consuls. And he tells them, there's something I want to talk to you about, and I want to do it in private. That's what he tells them. And the consuls grant him this meeting. And when they are just the three of them, this is what he tells them. It is with great reluctance that I say anything to the disparagement of my people. I do not come, however, to charge them with having actually committed any offense, but to take precautions against their committing one. The character of our citizens is more fickle than I should wish. We have experienced this in many defeats, for we owe our present security not to our own deserts, but to your forbearance. Here at this moment are a great multitude of Volscians. The games are going on. The whole city will be intent on the spectacles. I remember what an outrage was committed by young Sabines on a similar occasion. I shudder lest any ill-advised and reckless incident should occur. For our sakes and yours, consuls, I thought it's right to give you this warning. As far as I am concerned, it is my intention to start at once for home, lest if I stay, I should be involved in some mischief, either of speech or act. So he reminds the consul of something that had happened in a previous games, where the Sabines had come and they caused a lot of trouble in Rome. They basically hurt people. And it's telling them he has intel that the Volscians are likely to do something similar, and he's kind of like warning them and telling them, I don't want, when that happens, I'm here and then I'll be accused of being part of it, and I don't want to live without warning you people. So, and he leaves. Immediately he tells them this, he leaves. And this makes the Romans very worried, and they believe him that he is a good man, and indeed the Volscians were planning to do something during the games. And they pass a decree that all Volscians should leave. And the Volscians are pushed. The way Livy describes it, the Volscians did not expect this. They are kind of like chased out of the city with no respect, with no concern for them. They are just told to leave, and they leave in a hurry. And they are not happy about this, of course, and they don't know what's happening. They are confused. And while on the way, they meet Autius Tullius, who is waiting for them. Autius Tullius was waiting for them at the Valentine Fountain that was outside Rome. And when he sees them, they of course expect him to say something because he was their leader. And indeed he does tell them something, and this is what he tells them in a speech. Even though you should forget the wrongs that Rome has inflicted and the defeats which the Volscian nation has suffered, though you should forget everything else, with what temper, I should like to know, do you brook this insult of yesterday, when they commenced their games by treating us with ignominy? Have you not felt that they have won a triumph over you today, that as you departed you were a spectacle to the townfolk, to the strangers, to all those neighboring populations, that your wives, your children were paraded as a gazing stock before men's eyes? What do you suppose were the thoughts of those who heard the voice of the criers, those who watched us depart, those who met this ignominious cavalcade? What could they have thought but that there was some awful guilt leaving to us, so that if we had been present at the games, we should have profaned them and made an expiation necessary, and that is the reason why we were driven away from the abodes of these good and religious people, and from all intercourse and association with them. Does it not occur to you that we owe our lives to the haste with which we departed, if we may call it a departure and not a flight? And you count this city as anything else than the city of your own enemies, where you lingered a single day, you would all have been put to death? War has been declared against you, to the great misery of those who have declared it, if you are really men. So he basically tells them that they've been wronged. Of course, they have bad feelings about what happened, and they have resentment towards Rome for throwing them out of the games. And he takes advantage of this, and he exploits this to make them even more resentful of the Romans. His goal, of course, is to make them resentful enough to pick up arms and go against Rome. And he manages to get that. And the Volscians are so angry, they go back home and they organize themselves and they declare war on Rome. And now Autius Tullius and Marcius Coriolanus lead the Volscians to come and attack Rome. First, they go attack small towns that were like colonies of Rome, such as Assae, Satricum, Longula, Pollusca, Corioli, Lavinium, Corbio, Vatellia, Trebinia, Manpedum. But then finally they decide to march on Rome, and they do come and they set up a camp. Livy tells us that was about 3 miles away from the city.
And the army was so big, the Volscians had come in huge numbers. And the way Livy describes it, the Romans were afraid. The Romans were not ready to battle at this point. This came as a surprise to them. They were not prepared. And there is this huge army that has just set camp a few miles from the town. The Volscians, under the leadership of Coriolanus and Tullius, start raiding the lands of the Romans. But they do it in such a way that only the lands and property of the plebeians are raided. That was the plan of course, Coriolanus. Coriolanus have these raiding parties led by Romans who knew the ownership of property around, and they would go and destroy property that is owned by the plebeians, not the property that is owned by the patricians. His goal was to put a wedge between the patricians and the plebeians so that there is a kind of like a civil war within the town. But he didn't manage to do that. The Romans stood together even though they were suspicious of one another. The patricians and the plebeians were suspicious of one another. They stood together. They sent ambassador to go meet Marcius Coriolanus and Marcius Tullius. And these ambassadors were not successful, of course, in persuading these two guys to stop what they were doing. They were told that the only thing that will make the Volscians stop attacking Rome was if the land that had been taken away from the Volscians was given back. These envoys went there several times. That's what Livy tells us. And then when they were not successful, the priests of the town went to meet Coriolanus and Marcius Tullius. And they tried to talk to them, but they were not given audience, so they didn't manage to talk to them. Finally, the women of Rome decided to take matters into their own hands. This alone shows that Rome was completely unprepared to fight this war or this battle. So the women go to where this camp is, and a message is sent to Marcius Coriolanus that there was a large body of women from Rome who wanted to see him. And he ignores them initially until one of his friends comes to him and tells him, "Unless my eyes deceive me, your mother and wife and children are here." So it turns out in the crowd of women who left Rome to come and seek an audience with Coriolanus and Marcius Tullius, his mother was amongst them and his wife and children. So when he was told that, he sprang up and he went to meet them. Now he meets them, his mother refuses to hug him. His wife also refuses to hug him and his children. And this is what his mother tells him: "Before I admit your empress, suffer me to know whether it is to an enemy or a son that I have come, whether it is as your prisoner or as your mother that I am in your camp. Has long life and unhappy old age brought me to this, that I have to see you an exile, and from that an enemy? Have you the heart to ravage this land which has borne and nourished you? How hostile and menacing the spirit in which you came! Did not your anger subside as you entered its border? Did you not say to yourself when your eyes rested on Rome, within those walls are my home, my household gods, my mother, my wife, my children? Must it then be that had I remained childless, no attack would have been made on Rome? Had I never had a son, I should have never ended my days a free woman in a free country? But there is nothing which I can suffer now that I will not bring more disgrace to you than wretchedness to me. Whatever unhappiness awaits me, it will not be for long. Look to these, whom if you persist me, your present cause, an untimely death awaits, or a long life of bondage." So she talks to him, she tells him these things, and Marcius Coriolanus is affected. And then he sees his kids and his wife. Finally, they do embrace him, and the women are crying, everybody's crying, and Marcius Coriolanus gives up. He steps down and he removes the army from the camp and they go away. And Livy tells us that the records he had read is that he went into exile for good and he died out there of old age. He never came back to Rome.